edition of Serverless Craic. So we're going to continue our series about going through the book, The Flywheel Effect. How are we keeping? All good?
Good.
Loving life, all good.
Living life. Mike is in the studio.
In the studio.
I was at a great AWS event yesterday in Belfast, the Generative AI Day. So big shout out to Fiona and team for putting on a great event.
Very good. You're now artificially intelligent.
Indeed.
Happy days.
Better than just a normal level of intelligence, that's for sure.
Very good. I wouldn't mind it going, but I couldn't make it long, so it looked brilliant. Good stuff. So we're on. So this is quite a big chapter. This is chapter 2, Wardley Mapping. So we figured we'd split this into 2 different editions. So we're going to do, like, if you want, this is chapter 2.1, if it were. And we're really going to talk about kind of like, I suppose, our approach to mapping. We'll not get into the specifics about Wardley Mapping itself, like, but when did we start mapping? Can you remember? About 10 years ago. I think Simon was writing his blog around 2013. Remember, he used to tweet about it. I remember looking at it back then and being utterly confused, but thinking it was interesting.
I really know some of you went to the Agile Scotland as well, and seen them as well.
Yeah, we seen him at a conference in 2016, I think it was, and I remember I'd been trying to work it out maybe in 2015, and then when I seen him speak at 2016, I remember like a penny drop going, But I remember I was already trying to figure it out, and then I seen him speak, and that was useful. I think me and you were at that, Mike. Do you remember?
It's a long time ago. I think that must have been 2016.
2016, I think it was.
No, when we were gathering a lot of materials for the book, we were looking at some of the old pictures of some of our old maps and stuff on whiteboards, and they go way back, like 9-10 years.
A lot of really bad pictures, but that's all part of it. But the thing, I mean, I certainly thought, like, there's a thing about how essential is this technique. And I mean, there's a couple of things that we sort of laid out. Like, and the nice thing I always thought was that the maps track movement. There was always the thing about a presentation or a diagram, and you could never track movement. So that was a big thing that I remember talking about, because we used to always talk about mapping around a tech stack or a capability. Think, what do we want to move? We used to do it to figure out what's the landscape and what's the move we should make. And that movement was always really important.
Yeah, and I think especially around all the transformation and sort of emerging technologies around that time, 9, 10, 11 years ago, there was a lot of just things happening, and mapping was just, this helps us wrap our heads around all these moving parts, all these elements that are sort of shifting around us that we couldn't quite wrap our heads around, and couldn't get any sort of situational awareness around. And I think that's the other thing. It's such a big enabler for just getting some situational awareness, understanding what it is you're trying to do and what things are moving around.
Yeah. I like, the big thing for me, like, I know you guys were way sort of ahead of me on this as well. I think it clicked for me in that, you know, it's like when you have sort of technical or deep conversations, and you kind of go into nuance, and you kind of bounce from topic to topic or whatever, and it's very hard to draw action from it, you know, like, so you'll spend an hour and a half talking about something, and then you don't know, did we actually accomplish anything? And then when I actually participated in one of the first sessions, now this time I didn't know how mapping worked, but I think I participated in one of your sessions, and instantly it kind of just clicks. You know, it's almost like a role agnostic way of communicating, you know, like, so we typically communicate with big architecture diagrams, which then instantly blows business people or product people out of the water, you know, and they don't know what anything means. And then similarly, if they talk to you in terms of maybe like a value stream or something along those lines, you're kind of then scratching your head, or, you know, so it was almost like, oh, okay, yeah, we're kind of talking the same thing. And then being able to capture that, so the next time you kind of met, you could almost rehydrate it from the captured map, you know.
There's also a thing in a big company, there's lots of stuff happening, and if there's 3 or 4 of you, you're all seeing different things in different pieces. So the map was a nice way to come together and, like, make sense of things, and also share stories. Did you hear about this project where this thing happened and that thing happened, and they're going to move this over here? So you're almost like synchronizing, coming together, and having one representation of your collective kind of, you know, what you're experiencing.
Yeah, I think especially around that time, a lot of companies are trying to go through their sort of agile transformations, and like a lot of the teams were delivering code, but not understanding who it was for or why they were doing it. So I think that focusing around anchoring around the user and their user needs was really impactful for us. It really started us to think about who are the actual users you're doing this software for? Who are the people that are actually going to use this? Do you know? Do you know if you're going to be successful with the things you're doing today? That was huge, because it just cut through all the nonsense of all these sort of ceremonies and just buzzwords and things teams were doing at the time. Just really simply, who's this for? Why are you doing this?
All the tweeners. Yeah, you're not doing your project for the Scrum Master or the product owner. That's not the customer. Do you know what I mean? Just to sort of lift people up out of that, for sure. Yeah, the anchoring on the customer was massive.
Yeah.
It was nice as well. It almost give you like an as is and to be view as well to visualize the how, which was nice, I thought.
Yeah, that was huge.
Yeah, I think particularly if you're based in engineering, I kind of feel like some of the maps we started to do, when you're plotting some of the custom stuff, there's all the stuff that goes with custom, like custom bespoke skill sets and custom bespoke implementations and software, and then you can begin to have, okay, so this is why this is so expensive, or this is why this is so slow, because all this stuff has to go with it. Like even as the industry started to move more towards cloud, things like that, you can start to see, these kind of bespoke skill sets that organizations manifest in the maps, didn't you? Like, every time we brought someone in, they had to go through training or upskilling, and you could kind of map that as a, something on a thing to say, okay, well, actually, do we really want to continue doing that, or do we want to focus more on value? And, and then also look at so there was loads of good reasons for, this is what it currently looks like, but what is good look like? Where do we want to move to,
Tell me visualizing how, making the value chain visible was like, do you know that this depends on this, and this thing depends on this other thing, and this other thing depends on this other thing, and that thing over there is one developer in a corner in Belfast who runs the whole thing, and if he doesn't do his job, the whole thing's falling over. So that was just huge, being able to see the value chains and seeing where the dependencies really were in your org and in your stack and in your team. It's great.
Yeah, that element of kind of sense making. Another thing that as we started to develop this technique, when a few of us created a map, we'd all kind of be on the same page, and it's like we all kind of challenge that map. So that means afterwards, if someone were to say to you, what do you think of X? You have a pretty informed opinion. Do you know what I mean? And if somebody else was in the same conversation or similar conversation, they'd probably say something similar, because you kind of align as a team and have a pretty decent point of view on a problem, because we had all sat as a team and mapped it out, challenged it, you know what I mean, poked around it. So it was a very structured way of thinking deeply about a problem and come up with an approach. So that definitely helped do that. As you say, I might kind of put some order on some of the rabbit holes you'd go down without it.
Yeah, and it's very much it was rough and ready, deliberately. It wasn't somebody's gone off and created a really polished PowerPoint deck that just put lots of blood and sweat and tears into, and then it became very hard to challenge it. We were very open to, here, what do you think about this? We think that component's over here. I think it's custom. And somebody might say, oh no, that's actually it's a product. You haven't looked at this the right way, or you forgot this dependency. Whereas that was very hard to challenge, very slick presentations or PowerPoints or Word docs that people have spent a lot of time doing. So it was inviting that challenge was huge for us, and it goes along with a lot of other stuff around psychological safety. Using a map was a great way of just inviting people to have their say, right? It
was also good for inertia points, because as you drew the map out to the value chain and you maybe have a component and say we need to commoditize this component, you'd often draw a bit of inertia to say, yeah, but there's a process that's in place that means we have to do this, so we can't make that. And then you think, well, why do we need that process, or why is that platform slowing us down, or maybe there's a resistance to change. So you'd discuss the reason why something couldn't evolve, and maybe even challenge that. You might think it's one thing, but it's actually, you'd actually discuss that sort of inertia point and agree, yes, this is what it is, and then you could talk about, right, how do we solve that? How could we remove that inertia?
Yeah, I think even just augmenting that with like actual some text narrative alongside that to say, this is an inertia point for us. This is the problem that we need to address. This is something you want to call out. For those who weren't following them up, you had at least some of those talking points you could actually extract.
Yeah, and I think we talk about like these earlier, the point you were making around movement, sort of where we're at and where we want to get to. Part of that is also kind of challenging and acknowledging some of them inertia points. Some of those things that are maybe driving the wrong behavior in squads, or you can't move something along because there is this blocker or this handoff, or the team's having to wait 3 months so they go down a different route, or those sorts of things are really important to kind of quantify, I think, as well. So then you can start to kind of add additional layers into your map by how much is this actually costing? And then those sorts of things for me are really useful in terms of strategic maneuvering as well, because you'd call those out, wouldn't you, and say, right, we've got to action those things, and we've got to get these sorts of things addressed. And and those are your non-typical, like if someone's invested in an initiative or a project, it's important that you have those conversations around certain things that you want to change, and I think those things are really useful as well.
And sometimes removing an inertia point, it's a weird priority. It could be something like we need to teach the security department how to code in JavaScript so they can build a dashboard, so they can monitor something, so we can bring in so it's always kind of contrived. It seems quite weird, but there's a bigger rationale of doing this. So it's sometimes it's easier to track why that's a priority. And also there are stories that go within maps, which and you may come back to a map 6 months later and remember, oh, that's right. That's why, there's a bigger picture that we talked about. So there was all these sort of like I think reasons why we thought it was important, but then we sort of worked out a couple of principles as well. And we don't need to go into these in mad detail, but I think some of them are kind of interesting. Like these aren't certainly a defined list, but I thought it was interesting. First one we thought, which was interesting, was courage. I think when you are in the face of this is just change management. When you are in the face of a big messy problem, it's often easy just to go, oh, that's not my problem, that's crazy. But sometimes you need to stand up and say, well, what should we do? You know what I mean? So having the courage to be able to explore, map it out, and figure like suggest something.
Yeah. I mean, that's a big one, isn't it? It's again, when you're not sure why you're doing certain things, or even if the strategic direction is just to kind of keep going, it'll be okay. Just having the say, right, what should we do? And kind of trying to use the information and data and the situational awareness to make better decisions. So
it's a massive one. Next one is collaboration. I thought this was massive, because we had a big enough architecture team and lots of other people we worked with. It was a great way to just break into a group of a few people and get a shared understanding.
That was it really drove. It removed the barriers between ourselves as sort of senior technical leaders and the teams we were collaborating with. It really was a good vehicle, a good collaborative tool to remove some of the that's just the architect talking nonsense. It became much more of a shared conversation when we were mapping out these things with teams.
Another thing you think about it's not like we sat and mapped together all the time. We would often map with teams and then come back and say, yeah, I did this map with this team. Would you see the map? So there was a lot of mapping with other teams.
And I think it was also because we were operating across so many teams and so many people, the maps were they were a great enabler for us to get context. Oh, I'm going to go talk to this team. Oh, I'll look at the map. Maybe 5 minutes before the session with the team, and immediately you're able to scan through the map, see all the dependencies, see the value chain, see the inertia point, see the movement or the lack of movement, and you have that context, so that you're having a better informed conversation with the team. So even us with hectic schedules and going from team to team to team, you were having a much more meaningful, better informed collaboration with the teams because you were able to get that context into your head.
Definitely. The next one is empathy. It's definitely one about like who's the user and what do they need. We used to always ask that, what does the user of this thing need? Not what they want, what they need. And often it was like we don't know, and then like, well, how can we find out? let's not get lost, you know, in some low-level technical detail. Let's figure out what this thing is for.
Yeah.
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 No, I was going to say I think that's a huge one. You know, like even when you factor that into any sort of conversation, it's again, it facilitates some of the challenge, doesn't it? Does your user really need this? You know, what are you trying to accomplish, or
I
what are
did
we
this.
trying to
I
accomplish?
did, I did this 2 days ago. Somebody mentioned this really gnarly problem, and it was all sorts of rabbit holes. And I was like, "Well, do they really need that?" And it was like, "No, okay, let's not do it then." It's like, you know, because we're all engineers, and when you get stuck in the solution space and you forget about the problem. The narrative is interesting as well, because there's always a story. Do you know what I mean? With there'll be a sequence of things.
Yeah.
And as well, even perspective. There's perspective around, you know, it could be down at like a class level or up at the whole organization level. So there's different perspectives and different teams depending on, like I say, as Gregor would say, what flow you're at in the elevator architect.
Yeah, I think the narrative is interesting because you may give somebody the narrative, you may even create a PowerPoint deck off the map, but never show them the map. Right? You can articulate the narrative and tell the story, but if they're not familiar with mapping, if it's a different sort of audience or there's a different context, you don't necessarily need to show the map. You have it behind you, you can show you're working out, but the narrative becomes very valuable, very, very powerful.
Yeah. And I think as you get used to reading maps, and I'm sure you kind of go through it when we talk about like how maps constructed, but them themselves, you can read it because everything about a map has meaning, right? So it's very easy for us to then, once you kind of get used to it, it's easy to come in and really, as you said, Mark, be able to come up with or draw that narrative from the map and rehydrate sort of thinking around it. And again, I think it helps add boundaries and to like a complex subject matter. So instead of you kind of going all a million, rabbit holes, we can kind of then keep it in a fairly structured, perspective that allows us to create fairly consistent narratives that drive strategic maneuvering, right? But those are important. I think they're very important principles. So any good map has those.
That basically moves on to the next principle about focus, right?
Focus.
Don't map of the world, right? It's very tempting to go, and I was always guilty of this. Add more dependencies and add more components, and then your map's like 40 things, and then Dave would go like, right, let's reduce that down to like 10. What are the 10 core elements or core components of this thing we're trying to map out?
Yeah. Like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind, like you just start going bananas, drawing loads of stuff. And we used to say, like, I sometimes say if you've more than about 15 or 20 elements, you've gone too big, like bring it back down again. But so it's not awful going big, but then you have to go back down again,
It's like anything in our kind of industry, creating the abstractions is actually really quite a difficult thing to do, but over time, I think you do get better at it,
Yeah, for sure. Then two left, dialogue. Like this is really important. The conversation is more important than the map. Like Wardley mapping is actually an excuse for a few people to sit down and talk to each other. You know what I mean? You'd often see, especially engineers at the start, will think it's a model. We need to create this model, and then the model will be correct. It's like, no, don't worry about this picture. The picture just helps this conversation. The dialogue is more important than anything else.
Yep.
So the map is just facilitating that. Yeah, that was really important. Don't be precious about the actual drawing. It's enabling the dialogue. And then finally, challenge. It's something we often find. It is much easier if there's a map and you draw something somewhere for someone to say, I don't think that's right. And then you both say, well, no, I'm not sure, rather than I don't think you're right. You know what I mean? That's much more aggressive to say, I think you're wrong, or to say, I think that component on the picture is wrong. It was an easier way to sort of, discuss something where you might have different opinions, or you maybe just don't know. So the idea of challenge in the sort of challenge the thinking was much easier to do. I think it's actually a part of mapping that challenge is expected and welcomed.
Yeah, there's no such thing as a scientific or absolutely correct map. As you said, it's facilitate good conversation. It's the kind of have something to allow you to ask questions, draw understanding, talk about kind of potential, facilitate the creative conversations. So yeah, I think that's important. And again, I've never been involved in a mapping session where it's been intense or there's been friction. It's normally, so why do you think that's there? Or explain to me what you mean by X, and I didn't realize such and such. Is that true? And then you're like, okay, that's good. Those are good. The position of these things on the map draw questions that then facilitate sort of conversation, don't they?
It's weird. I mean, you could probably have exactly the same conversation with no picture, and then there's two people kind of, dancing about, trying to suss each other out, where the map, it becomes a non-event. It's weird.
Yeah, very good.
So that's the crack. There's those 8 principles of Wardley mapping, which I think are interesting. I still think they stand up pretty well. I still think they're useful in how we map now. And I definitely thought it was more important to capture how we map before we explain the mapping process itself. So I think next time we'll do chapter 2.2, where we'll get into actually how to start mapping in your company. If you have a group of people and you want to get going, how to start that. But until then, give us a wee look at theservicesites.com. Give us a look at our YouTube channel or Twitter handle. Thank you.
Thank you.